Hey guys, welcome to the Launchpad, and thanks for joining me with the rest of the Rehab Rebels. If you don't already know, the Rehab Rebels are on a mission to launch out of the rat race, and we're committed to doing it together. If entrepreneurship, real estate, and passive income mean as much to you as they do to us, then you're in the right place. Sit back, buckle up, and prepare for launch. If you're enjoying our episodes, don't forget to subscribe to the Launchpad and like us on Spotify. Just tap one of the links below. By subscribing, you'll get new episodes delivered straight to your library every week. I'm here today with David Panek, and David brings a perspective that is both unique and very important for anyone interested in construction or remodeling. So David got started in his career as a property manager, property owner of over 30 units. And that eventually progressed into a career in new home building. David ended up building over 30 homes a year until the late 80s when mortgage rates climbed to upwards of 18% for a 30-year mortgage. And as you can imagine, 18% interest rates really put the kibosh on new home building and the real estate market in general. And at that time, David was forced to pivot into a new career into the Kansas City Department of Planning and Development. And that is the reason that David is with us today, to shed light on the perspective from someone who not only knows new construction, remodeling, property management, but can also tell us what these projects look like from the other side of the table at the permit department. So David, thank you for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to all of our audience gleaning all of the wisdom that you've gotten in your 25-year career there on the other side of the aisle. I think that this message, if it's followed by our clients, can potentially save thousands of dollars on every one of their projects. So thank you for being willing to share with us. The other day we were talking and you told me a little bit about your story. You said that your mom got you into the real estate business in the first place. So how did that go?
It was fun, really, from the start. It was interesting and doing repairs.
And you were kind of born into this, right?
Right. Yeah, I was probably 2.5, 3 years old when my mom would drag me. We had 2 rental houses at the time. She was a full-time mother, and do that. She'd check the renters out, do a lot of the painting and stuff, and we just I enjoyed it from the start.
So how long was it until you started doing some remodeling and got out of just the property management?
Well, it was a time. My mom eventually was forced to go back to work and to her real job. She was a dietitian, and she got rid of the rental houses. And so later, after college, we got into it. We actually went into business together, and we bought some units. Then eventually about like a 30-unit apartment building.
That's a lot of management, with that many tenants.
It was a lot. It was a lot of hard work. You know, the middle 80s, money was expensive, and those were kind of the beginnings of private loaning, really, and because you could get better rates in short terms. And
when did the new construction career start? Did you start first doing some flips and remodeling?
Well, actually, it kind of came together with, doing the work full time. So that was really my job then. And then I kind of was expanding. I'd gotten married and started a family. And the building just made sense. I was partnering in a small real estate company. A lot of opportunities with developers, getting into lots. And I started building then. And it worked well, and I had time to work on the rentals. A lot of times I could shift my crews around. They were helping me on the building to do work on the rental units all at the same time.
So you got into doing business with Bernie, you said back in, I think it was 1989.
1989 probably would have been my first year with Bernie. And at the time, it was hard to get loans to build houses within Kansas City.
So he was giving you new construction loans?
New construction loans.
Gotcha.
And they were favorable rates. They were, at the time, they were a lot less cumbersome getting into them. He made the process easy, and it made sense. and he had a lot of knowledge already about Kansas City, because that would have been the first time I actually would built inside the city.
He is a wealth of knowledge, isn't he?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I mean, he's seen everything.
I don't think I've heard every story.
Oh no, you could never.
And I've known him, I guess, for darn near 40 years, I guess.
He really is like a celebrity. People call in, I've heard of Bernie. Is he there? Is he actually? Am I going to get to talk to Bernie?
You bet.
He's just been around in this business for so long, and he's acquired so much knowledge. It's amazing. So we were talking the other day, and you're telling me that the new building career that you had rolling, you're building over 30 homes a year. At the time, you had 15 rental properties. You're working 80-hour weeks, 7 days a week, and the toll is just wearing on you. Not only that, but interest rates were 18% back then.
Yeah, so they started to become favorable, but again, they were difficult.
How did that decision go? What led you to pull the plug and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to switch and I'm going to get into a new career?
It really started looking to my future. And like I said, by then I had 2 children, and I was spending so much time away, and the time I was just trying to make it to soccer games and kids' schools and all that, it just didn't make sense to me, and I thought I could still do the rehab part. Mm-hmm. And then I just really quit building, and then looked into some kind of a future with Kansas City, looking into the building inspection side or the engineering side, something.
So you kept your rental portfolio.
Yeah, unfortunately, it wasn't a good time to sell then either. So I kept that, and it worked. And then I started doing rehabs on the side too. And I did that through the period. And if we couldn't sell one, if the market wasn't good, then we'd hang on to it. And then they kind of started accumulating.
When you started, your first job at Kansas City was as a building inspector.
Right, I was commercial building inspector from the start.
So what was that like, having been a builder, been a property manager, and now you're in there? Were there any realizations when you first got started that first year?
Well, probably I kind of felt like I was moving into the enemy camp. I mean, the things that were frustrating to me, all of a sudden I was on the other side of it, and some of them made sense, and some of the things just all came down to consistency with how you were approaching it from the other side. But I enjoyed it, and I knew a lot of the contractors already, so it was a really easy transition.
Last time we spoke, you said something that stood out to me. You said the inspector is not your enemy. So you said that was something that occurred to you. How did you realize that? How did you realize that they're not against you?
Well, from the beginning, all of a sudden you're watching the contractor, and you kind of felt like, wow, I was just there, and I'm thinking the same thing I know that he's thinking. Mm-hmm. And you would learn the inspectors, you did feel like they really were trying to help it. They weren't really trying to obstruct you. And then again, it was all in how it was being approached. Uh-huh. was really the big deal. Approach, and if you had the knowledge, they respected you, and they would help you.
Was there anything else that you saw that the guys who were looking at it the right way with the right approach, what separated them from people that weren't doing it right?
Well, probably, a lot of the ones that weren't approaching it right really had been consistently doing that for a while. And then all of a sudden, you could realize these inspectors know that they're a problem from the start. Yeah. So again, I think probably the whole attitude's different. But the ones that were doing it well really sailed through, and lack of a better word, they negotiated things. Building codes are just the minimal standards. They're not supposed to be pretty. They're not supposed to anything. They're the safety. And again, if you approached it that way and you're trying to achieve the minimal standards for the city, then it worked.
So it's a mindset. It's not an adversarial mindset. It's you just have to embrace the facts that this is what needs to be done. These inspectors aren't here to hurt me, they could actually help you if you're willing to try to go along.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of them were former tradesmen themselves and had a lot of experience. And most of the time, they're friendly and will offer it. Yeah, it never, once you got working for the city, it never felt like anyone was really out to get anyone. And it didn't feel like it used to.
So you spent several years as a building inspector, and then you moved up to project coordinator. At that point, you're overseeing a lot of projects, and you're seeing the paperwork and the files come across through the system. What were some insights that you got as in that role, even more so than you had before as a building inspector?
You saw the whole project at once, and it was really every commercial project that was coming through Kansas City was coming through the office I worked in. And probably the biggest deal is you knew the designers, you knew a lot of the owners then, and you knew a lot of the contractors, because we'd have a meeting and have all these people on at once. And again, you could see the project from the start. In your mind, you could just determine if one was going to work or one was going to be a lot of problems, and then you would try to fix those things or try to bring it to their attention, saying, you can make this easier if you go this route. And in your head, if you don't, then that's all you can do at the time.
What was it about the ones that you saw it from the start that they weren't going to work? How did you know?
Well, probably the start was, if the owner was the only one you were meeting in the beginning, a lot of times you could tell from his attitude. A lot of times you were meeting just with the designers in the beginning. A good designer, you got to know them. A good designer, you knew if the owner had hired a good designer, then probably they were going to hire good contractors, and the whole thing was going to run pretty smooth, because their objection was to build this project and to build it in time, and that was really their whole game.
So the bad ones came in lacking a plan.
Kind of deceiving on things, common things that I guess maybe they thought you wouldn't know or understand.
But you'd seen all of this stuff 1,000 times. You've seen every trick. You saw it before it even came out of his mouth.
Oh yeah, and unfortunately tried some, through time. And yeah, you can tell. And like I said, my thoughts were trying to make the project easier, so it went down the road, and we had more projects. And the same thought you had when you were building. You want to get through something, be smart about it, get it through quick, and get it through correctly and done.
Do you think all the staff there could pretty well see which clients were going to be a headache and which weren't?
Oh, absolutely. Like any organization, and they talk, and you have preconceived notions before you meet people.
So you think that just because of that, they got treated even more harshly by the permit inspectors?
Well, they're really suspected that they're thinking something's going to be a problem.
So they're shooting up red flags on themselves, and
Absolutely.
Now your attention is even more on them than it would have been.
Absolutely.
What does it take to do one of these projects right? When you see one coming in and you said, you know what, this one's going to finish well, I can see it from the start. What is it about that project that told you that?
Well, probably just the organization. You wouldn't have had to have already done this exact project before, but how you organize for it. Everything in construction is fairly similar on how you the order you go through things, the consistency. Get a plan, stay with it, and be as honest as you can, the things you know, and it's going to run smoother.
So we had a lot of this conversation just a couple of days ago, preparing to sit down and meet together, and we talked through the anatomy of a good project, and I wrote some notes, and one of the things that came up was the determination of whether or not you have a structural or non-structural project on your hands. Can you talk us through that? What would entail a structural project? How do you know if the project that you have, from the perspective of an owner who's not a licensed general contractor, who just bought a property, they're analyzing it, trying to determine what they're going to have to do, how do they know whether they have a structural or non-structural?
Well, it's really pretty simple. You start with the beginning. Was your project, say, was it a fire damage? then there's going to have to be an evaluation, ideally before you bought the project, before you bought the house or the fourplex, duplex, or whatever. You need to evaluate it. And if there is, then you need to get the right people to look at it. If you have the knowledge, great. If you don't, you need to get the right people to look at it and determine. They should be able to determine if there's going to have to be some modifications. And at that point, like I said, you get the plan done and go ahead and move with the plan. And then moving away from a fire, if you're doing an addition, you're changing anything structurally, you're raising the roof, you're moving walls.
So you gave me a cheat sheet the other day. So a fire rehab, that's going to be structural generally. A room addition, load-bearing walls or joists that you're doing major changes to.
Absolutely.
Roof replacement, that's a new thing, right?
Yeah, and roof replacement, usually, a competent roofing company, there's really just a permit they pull, but you need to determine, if you're doing if they don't do overlays anymore, so they'll have to have a permit because they're really checking the decking to make sure that it's all exist and it was in good shape. And that's the point of that permit. But that one's pretty simple.
Okay. And then you said a garage conversion. Sometimes people would convert a garage into an extra bedroom or a living room or something. That's a permit.
Right, because obviously you're going to be adding electrical. You're going to be adding, you may add plumbing, but you have to add electrical, your plugs. And then you're going to have, some additional ductwork somehow to heat it and cool it.
Okay. And then what about on decks? You said there was some rules on decks.
Yeah, any deck that's over 30 inches off the ground is going to be considered a structural. Okay. And you're going to have to permit for that. You have to have your piers inspected when you're doing it. And I'm talking about a complete tear down, not just laying new decking on existing joists.
Okay. So now those are going to be the things that need to be permitted for structural changes. You can kind of do a rough back of the envelope analysis of whether or not you have those items on a project. Then the next thing that you would want to check through are electrical items. And you gave me a list of some things that would require a permit on electrical and some things that you can do without a permit. Can you talk us through those?
Right, I'll hit two things at once. I'll just say a lot of times these houses have been vacant. If you're rehabbing, maybe they weren't, maybe they were. So you may have two issues. You may have an electrical reconnect that basically, if everything was fine, but the power's been off for a while, then you're going to have to, it's just an inspection, and then they'll release the service again, similar to the gas meter. And those ones, just the owner can just pull those. It's not, it's a permit, but it's really just a visual inspection before they release those again. But back to the electrical, say it was a fire damage, you're replacing all kinds of wiring and circuits, or it can be just as simple as you're wanting to change out, that won't require a permit, change out fixtures, the electrical fixtures, or you're changing out plugs, switches. Those aren't going to require anything, just when you add an additional circuit.
Okay, so adding any wiring, messing with the panel, connecting new service, upgrading to 200 amp service.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're all going to have to be by a licensed electrician from Kansas City to release, for two reasons. Kansas City's going to require it and the power company's going to.
Yeah, and something I've seen bite people is they don't think they're going to need to pull a permit for electrical or gas, and then they find out the gas, the electric has been off for a while, as you said, and now they're having to pull a permit in order to get it back on, and that unravels just now. They've been doing other work on the house.
Absolutely.
They've done a little bit of structural work too. Now the inspector's out there. Now they have to stop the whole project. I don't know how many times that's happened, frequently.
Right. And that kind of goes back to what we talked about the other day too. You got to have a plan. You got to think out this logically, how things are going to happen. And again, the most important thing is you're going to have your power on. You can't function without it. Even if you're running a generator or whatever, it doesn't make sense. And you also got to be thinking that if I have in my head, I'm not going to do anything with the furnace, water heater, any of that, but it's going to have to come on eventually, then you need to get that taken care of in the beginning and then move from that point on.
Before you're tearing out sheetrock
before you're
and
tearing out stuff,
rewiring
because again, you're just getting. And once you kind of get into trouble, then you're kind of a nuisance, and they're going to know you're there.
Yep. And what about plumbing? So can we go down the list of what's going to require a permit plumbing wise, and what can you do on your own?
Well, I mean, just changing out vanity in your toilets. That's just a maintenance issue, and there's no permit for that. If you have to move, like your drain waste, you have to move your lines over somewhere, water or sewer. That's going to require a licensed plumber, and it'd be just a simple. The permits can be real simple. Same thing as electrical and plumbing. It's this real simple permit that just says adding addition plugs, adding addition fixture. There's no plans. There's nothing like that, and they'll just come out and look at it. Before you cover it up, do that. They may require an air test. They probably won't on if you're just adding, if you get into more fourplexes and get into a commercial, and it's different. But just plain residential, it'll be a quick process.
Say you had some frozen pipes over winter, and you busted a couple pipes, and you need to go in and cut a few inches out and patch it up and replace a valve here and there. Do you need a permit for that?
If that's really all you're doing, is it's really almost a maintenance issue, and you're not going to require a permit.
Okay, but turning on the gas after it's been on for a while, that's a biggie. You're going to have the gas test. That'll require an interaction.
Yeah, you're not going to get around that because gas companies, they have such liability. They're not releasing that. They want the city to look at it.
Yep. Okay, and then if you're going to replace the hot water heater, is that a permit?
Yeah, technically it's a permit.
Okay. And any new water lines, any new drain lines, if you're running new stuff, all that's permit. If you're running
new stuff, if you're not replacing, damaged parts, then it's going to require a permit.
Okay. And then what about on the mechanical stuff?
Mechanical, just basically maintenance on a furnace, small section of your B vent, or you're replacing a fan, inducer motor, or just anything that's replacing inside the furnace. You should have a licensed mechanical just for your own safety and for liability, but it's not going to require a permit. Replacing the whole furnace or replacing the coil for the air conditioner or the actual outside unit, those are all going to require permits from. And again, it's a simple one. These mechanical guys pull those all day long.
Okay. So new furnace, new AC, new ductwork, those things need permits.
Absolutely.
Okay, even if you're putting the exact same unit in, it's just a new one, still need a permit.
Absolutely.
Okay, but if the fan goes out on that furnace, or you have some component on the compressor, something like that, you can have that repaired. You don't need to pull a permit.
Absolutely.
For it. Okay.
No problem at all.
Okay. You talked about as the project coordinator, you mentioned the design team. You said you can tell a good project when it's coming in because of the design team. What does the design team entail? Who's on that team?
Well, again, if it's just a subdivision of a bunch of duplexes or houses or whatever, you're really going to have the actual architect who's doing each design.
Architect, okay.
The architect would hire a civil designer.
Sure.
That would do all the topos, everything that has to do with the site plans, everything like that.
That's like engineer, civil designer.
Yeah, civil designer would be an engineer, civil engineer.
So architect, engineer.
Right,
okay.
And then you might have a mechanical designer, same thing, that would be a licensed individual, and same thing with electrical.
Okay.
And that might be the whole thing. Nowadays there's actually companies that are just hired to oversee the project, that the owner hires. Okay. And you might even have that, but basically 3 or 4 designers.
Now that overseer could be the general contractor too.
Could be the general contractor. A lot of companies now have the general contractors that are designers also.
Okay.
That get into overseeing that for the owner.
Now, if you're going to need an architect and or an engineer, that means you're probably doing you're definitely doing structural work.
Absolutely.
You definitely need a remodeling permit. and that has to be pulled by a licensed contractor.
Absolutely, in Kansas City, it'd be a building contractor.
Okay, so if there's an architect, there's also going to need to be a general contractor,
right?
Unless you are a general contractor, and then you're filling that role for yourself. But it's either you or you need to hire someone to be that guy.
Right, especially in residential. If you have an licensed architect, then more than likely they're doing something. Okay. You don't even have to have an engineer. A lot of the work can be done by an architect, if it's minimal.
Okay. So before you start working on the project, you should determine whether or not it's structural, whether or not you're going to need permits on electrical, plumbing, mechanical, kind of get your roadmap planned out, then go find your contractor if you're going to need one, unless you have a license. But if you don't, you need to go find one and then let him become familiar with the project. Am I saying this right?
Right.
And then you're going to determine whether or not you need an architect and an engineer, but it would be good to have that consultation and that conversation with your contractor that you've now chosen. This would be before you sign a contract with them, right? You don't just call them up, hey, can you give me a bid on this job? That comes later. You should consult with your contractor first on site. Is that right?
Absolutely. Take their ideas, take anything, that you can get, and it's going to make your project run smoother. Everyone's on board, and people that work in that field, this may not be your expertise. You may be a good organizer and a good overseer, but you need to take advantage of that.
Yeah, so I know from my own experiences, and I've seen many other people remodeling homes, it's easy to come into the beginning phase of a project. You call up the contractor, and you're there just to talk price. You're there just to say, okay, what's this going to cost? What's that going to cost? That's the only thing on your mind. You're not even thinking about permits and architects and engineers. Those just come in like bombs dropped on you 2-3 months down the road when you find out it was necessary. That's the wrong way to go about it. That first meeting should be all about the scope. It should be whether or not these things are going to be necessary, and then price becomes an afterthought once you know what needs to be done.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many facets to remodeling, a room addition on a specialty home. I mean, an architecturally designed home, that you're rehabbing, or even to apartment units, or you can't know all that yourself and take advantage of it. I mean, it's free up to that point.
Right. And you're getting this advice. You're almost getting your roadmap drawn out for you before you've even paid the contractor. Because he's still hungry for the contract. He wants to help you because he wants you to ultimately sign the contract with him.
Right.
So he kind of helps you along.
And another valuable thing is you're getting to know if you're even going to get along with this person.
Yep.
I mean, life does run smoother when you're getting along with the people you're working with.
Yep.
And, take advantage of their strengths and yours. And
So now let's say that we've done the right thing. We have this project. We called up a contractor or 2 or 3, and we found one that we jive with. We're there on the job. We're kind of analyzing whether or not it's structural, whether or not we're going to need electrical, mechanical, plumbing permits. We know those things now. How do we determine whether or not we're going to need an architect or an engineer? You told me there's a place that you could go online and there's kind of a checklist that you can read through?
In Kansas City, they have these bulletins, information bulletins. You can go on kcmo.gov and go to city planning, and they'll have multiple that covers really just about anything that has to do with permits, submittals, designs, and go through that, hopefully find one that applies to what you're trying to do. And I would go through the checklist, and if it makes sense, and it should, then that's kind of your roadmap, at least getting prepped for this.
And that could be something that you do with your contractor. You go in and you talk through, now you've seen the house, you're looking at this bulletin. The bulletin it's basically summarized descriptions of different types of things that a house might need. Is that
Absolutely.
Right?
And it'll describe even as simple as descriptive letters that you can use to pull permits depending on what work you're doing, as it is to what needs to be in your designs for your wall sections or your foundations or roof, your roof supports, and just go through those and see if something applies. I mean, it might even save you a little money with the designer before that point.
Are you saying that on the bulletin you can, if you're looking at wall replacement, there's going to be something to that effect? It's going to say something about load-bearing wall or interior wall replacement, something like that.
Right. There's a lot of, they call them standard details that the city has previously approved. They were engineered already, and they have all the specs that you need to do, like how many bars in your foundation, your spacing on joists, all those things, and they'll accept that, and actually your designer can implement those into your design.
And you might even be able to avoid the architect or the engineer on some of those things if you're going to be able to adopt a particular layout that was approved already.
Oh, especially like in fire jobs where you're just replacing a wall section or a roof, and you submit a descriptive letter, and saying that these are the things you're replacing, and you put that in with your, saying the standard detail, whatever the number is. So
a person and their contractor could read this list. They could download maybe some PDFs of a layout, a structural plan for a wall, a roof member, a deck, different things that might be on there. And some may not, but you check and see what's available. And you could actually save the time of your contractor drawing up their own plans. You could just submit that to the city and say, hey, we're going to do this, which is already approved by you all.
Absolutely. And something we had already talked about was there's a code question line, and I think you can actually make appointments and actually come in and ask questions. And code question, you can call up and ask them, do your research already, have these things in where you're going with your questions, and ask them, can I do this? Can I put this into a letter? Does it need to be sealed by an engineer or an architect? Try to do a lot of that stuff yourself before you get there.
Will that be indicated on the bulletin, whether or not an architect or an engineer will be needed? Can you kind of find out some of that information on your own?
No, I think that's probably going to be a question.
Okay.
I don't think they actually say, again, they're really just the whole point of them is using consultation with the designer so you don't have the designer creating something and then it's not approved.
So you and your contractor are looking at this menu. You pick out the one that you think is the closest. Now you kind of know approximately what you're going to need, even if your contractor isn't certain. Now the both of you call the city, communicate with them, express what you're planning on doing, talk about the bulletin that you found that's a close match, and they'll tell you, yeah, you're going to need to do that, but you're also going to need to get an engineer's report. They'll kind of give you the last few pieces.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because there's a code question line that is just for 1 and 2 family, and then there's one that's for commercial projects. And so more than likely, the person you're talking to on the phone is the one you're going to submit your plans to if you have to.
And man, imagine the difference. Well, you don't have to imagine it, but I'm imagining the difference of a project starting that way compared to someone coming in, acting shady, no contractor, no permits pulled. Now they're in their adversarial conversation with the inspector, and now it's just a mess, versus doing it this clean way. You haven't even necessarily spent any money at this point.
Absolutely.
You're not spent any money. You're getting your plan together. The city is impressed with how you're doing things. You're setting yourself up for success from the start.
Absolutely. And you're building a pattern with the city. And at the same time, you're getting to know these people too, and it's going to make it a whole lot easier to submit future projects.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a way to turn the perceived enemy into your best friend. You let the permit office become part of your team. Don't fight them. Incorporate them into the plan from the start.
Absolutely. You got to be honest with your project, because you try to deceive them, they figure it out, and it's not going to end well for either of y'all. So
now when it comes time you've pulled the permits, you either have a general contractor or you don't. Some permits can be pulled by the electrician. If there wasn't structural changes, they can get those. So you'll have to sort that out earlier in the phase of the pre-construction planning. Now you have your permits. What's the best way to go about inspections? Who calls those in? Does it have to be the contractor to call in the inspection? Can the owner do it themselves? Who should do that?
Well, you're going to have to determine in the beginning if you're a person that's going to want to be involved in all the inspections, then I would coordinate with your plumber, electrician, and tell them that you're going to want to call those in. The only thing there is if it's something the electrician or plumber is going to need to explain, then you're going to have them in, or you're going to need to understand it yourself. But normally, it's pretty straightforward. Plumber calls in his, electrician calls in his. You just need to keep track of it. You need to come up with some kind of system there letting you know when it's done, because you don't want to be caught behind, well, you started sheetrocking because he told him he was taking care of it or she was taking care of it, and it's not.
It sounds like a savvy owner could prepare their project and actually use the inspectors as their inspectors and withhold some of the funds on the final contract price on the plumber, on the general contractor. You have to pay them to get started and as they're going, but maybe you withhold a significant amount of money until they pass that final inspection. The inspector is going to come out from the city and analyze their work. And if they don't like it, they're going to give you a punch list of things that were wrong. You almost have the city inspector helping you manage the project. Is that right?
Absolutely. But a good manager is going to know all the way through where he's at on everything. I mean, there are no surprises. If you have your inspections like you had, there's no surprises even at the end, other than the final work that they, something wasn't done correctly, putting a fixture on or whatever you're having done after your rough-in inspections.
Why? Why are there no surprises?
Because they inspected it in the beginning, they made sure it was to code, and rarely are inspectors going to go back on something they didn't see unless you were deceiving them. They'll negotiate with you and they'll move forward. And there's always a supervisor if you disagree with one inspector, because Kansas City, as most jurisdictions, have multiple inspectors. They have to, because they just can't afford one person to follow around one job. So you might have a difference of opinion and come out, but then you move up to the supervisor, and no one's mad. And it's just the way it is. And then again, you plead your case and you negotiate with them. Rarely they're going to make you tear out a wall for something unless it was dangerous.
And they've already been there at the early phases of the project. They saw what was being done. They either approved it or didn't approve it. They're helping you manage a good project from the start. You're making this sound like they're your friend and not the enemy. It's just it's a completely different paradigm shift.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think all of them want good projects and safe projects built, whatever city it's in. I don't think there's anyone out there that's really wanting to sabotage contractors, because again, it makes their life harder too.
Except for the guy who comes in deceitful and aggressive from the start, who's lying and cheating and making things up and trying to hide. Now that guy, they probably want to stop that guy because he's an aggravation.
Absolutely, and that's a hard thing to shake once that happens.
Yep. Yeah, you've created this reputation for yourself there with them.
And like everyone else, they talk and they know, and probably it's how you carry yourself too.
Yep. Wow. That whole perspective, if a person would take some notes on this and they would learn from what you're saying, they could save themselves months, years on projects, thousands of dollars. It's invaluable. The lessons that you're teaching. I mean, I can't wait to see how much it saves our clients just listening to this conversation. I know it's going to. And we could even create a checklist for them to where they can follow through and do some of these things that you're suggesting. If they would just follow the roadmap, they're going to clean up a lot of their frustrations.
Thank you.
What would your advice be to someone who is not a seasoned veteran? They're an aspiring contractor. They want to do it great, but they're not there yet. What's your advice to that person? How do they go about becoming a great contractor?
I think definitely writing out an actual schedule of when these things are supposed to happen. After you find your project and go through the evaluation part of it, the design of, I don't mean the actual design of the project, but the actual laying it out when things are supposed to be done, when you're going to hire your designer if you're going to need one, and getting that put together towards your permit.
So organization. Having a plan.
having a plan from the start. And again, just like when you have to fill out your cost estimate for your loans. I mean, it's kind of similar, but it's really doing the same thing. But this is something, and you got to stick to it. Consistency. You got to stick to it.
A good plan's only as good as the steps that you take towards it.
Performing it, and that's really the greatest advice I think anyone can give you is a consistent plan, and eventually you're going to get one that really works, that allows you to change the different projects. But you really have to lay this out from the start. You can't just try to wing it all the way through, because you don't know where it's going to end.
And a person's going to need help too, because until you've figured out what the recipe is for the perfect plan, you don't know how can you shortcut your way there.
Absolutely.
With advice, it sounds like having your advisory team is an important piece of this whole thing.
Oh, absolutely, and grab all the free advice you can. But again, the things that you have to pay for, the design part of it, you can have a contractor in early if you like, if you trust them and the knowledge. But you have to lay it out, and you have to follow it and get all kind of advice you can.
Well, I think that you've just started the first domino of saving thousands, tens of thousands of dollars for all of our clients, and thank you for doing that. It's truly it's a gift that you've given us today.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure chatting with you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Rebels. We'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment to rate and review the Launchpad. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more listeners like you. We'd love to talk with you about how we can help, whether that's financing your next deal or partnering with us as a passive investor. If you have any questions or would like to learn more, leave us a comment and one of our team will reach out to you.